So today we're going to talk about where you should get your rats from. I figure it's the next logical step in this progression of videos. But anyway, let's just get into it. So the most common place I feel like people get their first rats from, at any rate, is pet stores. So in the US, most common chain pet stores you can find rats at would be PetSmart and Petco. But any pet store rats are kind of going to be in the same category. So pet store rats come from rodent mills, which is, if you've heard puppy mills, rodent mills are basically the same thing, except instead of dozens of animals, there's hundreds, if not thousands. So they keep all the rats in drawers and just breed the female rat over and over and over again to produce babies. They do not care about health. They do not care about temperament. They do not care about, well, they a little bit care about appearance because they do want them to be a little bit sellable, but for the most part, the animal to them is just a product. Its life doesn't matter. It's an experience, and life doesn't matter. So pet store rats will often come with issues such as, they'll come with respiratory issues, they come with heart problems, they come with digestive problems, behavioral problems. Oftentimes pet store rats will be pregnant. It happens more often than you think it does. Because they don't care. They don't care about them. And then, if you didn't know, female rats should really only be bred a maximum of 3 times before it really starts to impact their health. And they should have time in between each litter. Most breeders do not breed their female rats 3 times. In my experience, most don't even go for a second litter from them. But any more than that, and starts to become a health issue. The other thing with pet stores is the employees are not taught very well, so oftentimes the animals will get missexed. So you'll have females that come to you pregnant because they're stuck with males. Rats can get pregnant around, they become sexually mature around 5 weeks old, depending on the line. Pet store rats, it's really hard to say because the lines are so mixed up and jumbled and not healthy. So the other factor for that is that pet store rats tend to not live very long. So for a long time, I got rats from pet stores because I didn't know any better. And I would say 4 or 5, I had 16 total pet store rats. I'd say 4 or 5 made it to 2. Most of them did not make it to 1.5 years, and I had 2 that died as babies. So 1 came to me in the process of dying, essentially. And that's just a very common experience with pet store rats. It doesn't matter what pet store you get, the rodent mills will work with any of them. Even pet stores that aren't part of a chain, oftentimes their rats will be from the same rodent mills, but you'll occasionally get a pet store that works with a breeder. That breeder is still producing for sellability, they're still producing for demand. They may not be a large rodent mill, but they would be considered a backyard breeder, which I'll get to in a second. But yeah, I do not recommend pet store rats, as with everything on this list, I'm just going to put out the facts as I know them. I don't think you're a bad person if you choose to get your rats from a pet store. I do think that you're going to be in for heartbreak. And I do think a lot of these options aren't the best, but as a disclaimer, I don't think you're a bad person if you choose to get your rats from a source that I wouldn't. Nor do I think that it's necessarily the rat's fault. You can get good rats from anywhere, you can get bad rats from anywhere. In my experience, pet store rats tend to lean more toward the unhealthy, antisocial kind. I've also had them become food aggressive because they have to fight for the food. It's 20, 30 rats to a drawer, there's not going to be a ton of food. Which leads us nicely into feeder bin rats. Feeder bin rats are from the same stock, to be perfectly honest. So Petco, for example, their live rodents are feeder rodents. You can get them as pets. In fact, the employees are often pretty happy when you do. But they are feeder rodents. So they are from the exact same stock as the pet rodents. There is no difference between them. They are from rodent mills. And it's even worse because they don't care if they're mixed sex, because they're supposed to be food. So my local rat rescue gets rats all the time because they gave birth in a snake tank and the owners didn't know what to do about it, so they just gave them to the rescue. It's very common. Feeder bin rats, if they live very long, you know, it's up in the air. They don't live very long either. It's kind of the same. Like, it's the same stock, same story. I know it can be like, oh, well, I rescued them from a feeder bin. The reason a lot of people say don't get rats from pet stores is because by giving them your money, you're creating the demand that allows these rodent mills to stay open and keep mass producing the rodents. I personally do not believe in live feeding. I think it's cruel, but even that contributes to rodent mills. And the fact is, rodent mills also produce the frozen food. So, like, I don't have a problem with snake owners, really, or definitely don't have a problem with snakes. They're just animals. They just have to do what they have to do. But it is just one of those things where it's like, there's not much you can do about it. But as a rat owner, you cannot contribute to the issue. So, beyond pet stores and feeder bins, what are your options? So, the next step would be to try and find rats outside of those places, obviously. So, the most common thing you'll find when trying to find, say, a breeder, you'll find a lot of backyard breeders or feeder breeders. Feeder breeders are pet snake owners who want a healthier or cheaper alternative to buying frozen or live rats from the store. So they produce their own. So feeder breeders I have mixed feelings about them, because if they're selling their rats, typically they're just selling their overstock because they can't keep them in the house, they can't feed them off, so they're selling their overstock, and a lot of times they'll be very upfront and blunt about it. It's just like very cheap rats. They're not in it for the money, they're just selling, like I said, their overstock. However, they're not necessarily breeding those rats any healthier than the rodent mill rats would be bred, so you might end up with some very ill rats still. But on the other hand, sometimes you don't. Like, my friend, not my camera woman who's not here right now, my other friend, she got rats from a feeder breeder, and one of them was pregnant, because it's the same issue with feeder breeders as you get with feeder bin rats. But that was Humdrum's mother. Humdrum is obviously quite old at this point, probably because I got her spayed. But some of those rats, a lot of them died before a year and a half from respiratory illnesses and from pituitary tumors. Humdrum and Wookie are the outliers. Like, the oldest sibling aside from Wookie and Humdrum was my friend's rat Ghost, and he passed away New Year's Day. So yeah, you're gonna run into a lot of the same issues. You'll get rats that are cheap, but they might be pregnant. They're probably going to have some kind of underlying illness, because they're not being bred to live to 2 years old. They're being bred to either breed for the rats if they're female, or to be fed off. So that's just a risk you're gonna have to take. Morally speaking, most feeder breeders are just looking to sell their overstock. So it's not like the worst option. I personally want to do it for the same reasons I want to get pet store rats. I wouldn't want to support it. The next thing you're most likely to find is a backyard breeder. So backyard breeders are in it for the money, basically. They don't take as good of care of their rats, typically. Sorry, I was watching Humdrum. She's got a little bit of HLD starting, and every time she climbs, I just kind of want to see how she's progressing. But anyway, backyard breeders. So a lot of times they're producing rats for money. So they're going to produce a ton of rats, just like feeder breeders and just like rodent mills. And they're not going to necessarily be able to keep an eye on the genetics and longevity, and they'll tell you things that aren't necessarily true, or whatever they need to say to sell you a rat. So they'll say things like, this rat has a lifetime guarantee for temperament or health, or that they won't know the different varieties very well, so they'll just throw out some really off the wall names for rats that aren't accurate. They won't really know how to care for them. They'll give you false information on how to care for them because of that. And a lot of times, there's one near me who had over 100 breeder rats, which is a lot. And so like she would just constantly be posting on Craigslist with dozens and dozens and dozens of babies of all kinds of varieties because she knew that's what would sell, and she'd be selling some varieties for like $80 a pop. You don't necessarily want to support that because you know those 100 rats, not all of them are going to be healthy, not all of them are going to get the right amount of care, not all of them are going to. She definitely doesn't have like cage setups. They're all living in bins, which bin cages work okay for babies or temporary caging, but as a permanent cage they do not work. So you don't necessarily want to support someone who's producing animals that are going to be sick and who is probably not taking good care of their own animals. So that I'll have a video later on how to find like a reputable breeder, but yeah, so backyard breeders, the quick and dirty of how to find them is they'll often post on Craigslist. They won't link a Facebook or a website for you to go check out their care. They'll use language meant to sell you an animal, such as like easy pets, health guarantees like for a ridiculous amount of time, or temperament guarantees for a ridiculous amount of time, or the prices will be outrageous. Like if you are looking for rats and like on Craigslist or something, and someone's trying to sell you a rat for more than $20, assume they're a backyard breeder and do not go to them. And they'll like put things in the title like adorable, or things like that, things meant to entice people who don't know a lot about rats into buying their rats. But on the flip side of Craigslist, you'll find a lot of rehomes. Rehoming is a good, viable option in my opinion. You get a lot of people who didn't know what they were getting into when they adopted rats, or who didn't prepare properly, or people who are moving, or people who are sick, or people who just can't keep them for whatever reason. A lot of times it's through no fault of the person, but rehoming is, it's good for the rats because you're not purchasing them from anyone who has got, ill intentions or rodent mills or anything like that. You might not be able to get babies, but you will very frequently, depending on how many rats are in your area, see accidental litters pop up. Sometimes you'll get a backyard breeder trying to claim it's an accidental litter, but again, an accidental litter, they'll be very upfront that it's accidental. They usually feel pretty bad about it, and the rehoming fee is typically pretty small because they just want them to go to a good home. And then you also have people who need to rehome for like if they have an elderly rat or a lone rat, and then all of that kind of stuff is good for like the rat community because it's ensuring the best quality of life for the rats. So in that same vein, you have rescues. So you will occasionally find rescues that aren't reputable, but it's not as common as with breeders. So rescues typically, like, you'll find reputable breeders who also rescue, but a dedicated rescue will never breed. So there's what's it called? I'll put the title of the form up here, but there's a license that most rescues will have, and if they are that kind of rescue, then it's a good bet that they're decent. And the thing with rescues is, again, you're not supporting anything like pet stores, feeders, backyard breeders, and you're helping rats, and you're making room for more rats to come into that rescue. A rescue can typically tell you the temperament of the rat you're going to bring home. They can match the personality of the rat to what you want and what you need. Actually, a lot of people say you can't get babies from rescues, which is definitely not the case. Most rescues end up with a ton of babies, from accidental litters. When feeder breeders are done, a lot of times they like have buckets and buckets of rats and are just like, I don't want these anymore, and rescues will go and take them. And females kept with males. Like, my rescue has probably, they probably get 10 litters a year, which is nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of rats. So yeah, rescues are a good option for that. And then finally, we have reputable breeders. I have no problem with reputable breeders. I think that reputable breeders are needed to kind of keep what we like about animals in existence, because if all we have are rescues, then eventually all we're going to have is sick, ill-tempered animals. And again, you can get rescues that are very sweet. Like the Weather Girls are rehomes verging on rescues. Ducky and Dorothy are rescues. Humdrum was a feeder breeder lineage. I've had one of my best heart rats was a rescue. You can get all kinds of rats from rescues. But if all we have is rescues, the health, even if the temperament is fine, the health will start to decline, especially if they're all from like rodent mills. So I have no problem with breeders. A lot of my current girls are from breeders, but it can be hard to find a good breeder, especially in the States. It's for a lot of reasons. Again, I'll have a video later talking about how to find a good breeder and what that entails for the US. But if you do find a good breeder and that's the option you want to go to, that's fine. You are allowed to curate your rat owning experience to what you want it to be, and that is fine. So a good breeder should know the temperament of the rats. They'll be able to help you with diet. They'll want to know your setup. They'll be able to help you with your setup, like not buying stuff but telling you what to get. And they should be working on things like health, temperament, all that kinds of stuff. So a lot of times you can get very sweet, docile rats that way. So those are the most common ways to get rats. My best recommendation is to either go through a rescue, to rehome, or to get from a breeder. So all the others I feel just kind of support stuff I personally wouldn't want to support. Again, you're not a bad person if you do want to go that route. Just kind of be aware and cognizant of what can come with rats that have those kinds of backgrounds. Because I find a lot of times people are surprised by how hard it is to bond with their rats or the issues they have with their rats. And some rats just have problem after problem after problem after problem. So yeah, just be aware of that before going through that route. So yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. All the fun stuff down below. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!